You'll turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Philippians chapter 4, beginning with verse 10. Reading from the New Living Translation of the Scriptures, the word of the Lord is as follows. Paul is writing from jail. He writes these words. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Now that I speak in regard to need, for I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Thus far, the word of the Lord. Now that I speak in regard to need, I've learned, whatever state I am, to be content. I want to deal with lessons from a decade. As usual, we gather tonight to celebrate the passing of one year into another. And on script, the exhortations around having made it from one year to a next are the ones that have been really made. Our reflections are around 1 year to the next. Our expectations are around 1 year to the next. And that would be okay in most years. But as Reverend Hickerson said in the beginning, this year it's somewhat different. Because we're not only observing the passing of 1 year to another, but we're observing the passing of 1 decade to another. We are observing having lived from one 10-year period to another. And because this is not just going from year to year, but because this is now going from decade to decade, it calls for another level of reflection, gratitude, praise, and planning. Because, friends, life on the verge of 2020 is vastly different from life on the verge of 2010. 2010, as you were entering 2010, you carried a BlackBerry for a phone and messaging. And you had an iPod for music. Netflix was DVD only. You didn't do any binge watching back then. Selfies were taken with big digital cameras. AI was Allen Iverson. B&Bs were on the ground with no air. Slack meant either loose or lazy. And the Marvel Universe was limited to Iron Man and Thor. Lyft was something that you gave somebody rather than what you called to get. It's a much different time now. There was neither iPad, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, or Candy Crush. An echo was something you heard from a mountain. Siri and Alexa were just cute names for kids. Drones were for delivering bombs and not boxes. There were no Zumba instructors, Uber drivers, app developers, podcast producers, social media managers. There were no search engine optimizers. There were no influencers. There was no Airbnb hosts. There were no drone operators. And there were no genetic counselors. 10 years ago, dignity was in the White House. America was beloved by its allies, respected by its observers, and feared by its enemies. Today, you can fill in the blank of what's in the White House, and you know how the world views us. Life on the verge of 2020 is much different than life on the verge of 2010. And friends, that's not just true on the general level. It's also true on the personal and individual level. For many of us, the past 10 years have been years of sweeping change. Some changes that we desired and others that we dreaded. It's been filled with marriages and divorces and remarriage, births and baby dedications, graduations, weddings, retirements, and deaths. Been filled with hirings and firings and layoffs and rehirings and businesses starting up and businesses failing and retraining and repurposing. It's been filled with illnesses and treatments and healings and relapses and remissions. Tell your neighbor, that's been me. And so tonight is not just a night to shout off a 1 year. It's the night to shout off a decade. I wonder, am I talking to anybody who understands that you got to give God more than a 1 year shout. You got to be able to give God a 10-year. This is a decade shout. Now, the younger that you are, the less significant this is. Because if you've only lived less than a decade or only 1 or 2 decades, this has less value to you than those with more wear on the tire. You see, for those who are younger, life is lived from the perspective of the immediate, the moment, the episode. Judgments and decisions and actions are made from the context of the moment, the immediate, and the episodic. For the young person, 1 day seems like a week seems like a month, and a month seems like a year. But Proverbs 20:29 reads, "The glory of the young is their strength. The gray hair of experience is the splendor of the old." That's the gray hair that you had or that you lost. You see, in your youth, you're all energy, your vigor, your vitality. You're about running through troops and leaping over walls. But with age comes the gift of experience, which grows out of patience and produces a perspective. And one of the things that I'm learning with the increase of years is that there is a change in perspective. The longer that you live, the more that you discover that the context of life is not the immediate. It's not the momentary. It's not the episodic. Life is lived from the standpoint of the ultimate, the long range, and the season. You see, no TV show worth its salt is concerned about one episode. No, a TV show that has made investment in being produced and piloted, they never shoot just one episode. Because their aim isn't an episode, it's a season. It's a season, it's a season, it's a season, and the relevance and power of the show is viewed from the season, not the episode. That's why you can't judge a show by an episode. You got to be able to stick it out and see the season. The journey from 2010 into 2020 is a seasonal journey, not an episodic one. When you look at life from seasons and not episodes, you understand that there are 2 inalterable experiences: peaks and valleys, highs and lows, victories and defeats, conquests and challenges. And as I look back upon this past decade, there have been some tremendous highs and some traumatic lows. In this 10-year period, I served as president of the Hampton University Ministers Conference, the largest gathering of black clergy from around the world. I authored my first book. I shared in ministry in 5 of 7 continents. I sat in rooms I didn't even know existed. I occupied positions I never dreamt about. I've done things I never would imagine. I've had some tremendous highs. But in this 10-year period, I've had some traumatic lows. Began with the death of one aunt, then the deaths of dear members too numerous to mention. When I started writing their names, it was a whole paragraph, and I could not mention all the names of the people who have died, who are members, who are dear to my heart, deacons and ministers and dear friends. The death of my brother, 2 cousins who were like sisters. My birth father died. My beloved sister Joan Parrott, my mama died. 2 surrogate mother figures died. A beloved armor bearer died. A beloved mentor, Charles Booth. Traumatic lows. Lows of loss, less, and left. Somebody can testify that your 10-year journey has been similar. There have been some tremendous highs, and there have been some traumatic lows. And when you look back over 10 years, the shout is, as has already been said, I'm still here. You are halfway sane after the 10 years you faced. You still know your name. The shout is that you've had some good days. You've had some hills to climb. You've had some weary days and some sleepless nights. But when you look around and you think things over, all of your good days outweighed your bad days, and you're able to say, I won't complain. You're able to say, sometimes the clouds hang low and you can hardly see the road, and you've asked the question, Patrick, why so much pain? But then you concluded, he knows what's best for me, even though this weary eye can't see. And I just want to say, thank you, Lord. I won't complain. Anybody can testify God's been too good to you. Past 10 years, God's been good to you. And if you felt like it, you could even go like Alfred Owens and go to that next one and say, it could have been you outdoors. No shoes and no clothes, all left alone with no friend or just another number, but with a tragic end. But God didn't see fit to let none of those things be. But every day by his power, the Lord just kept on keeping you. And you were here to say, thank you, Lord, for all that you've done for me. This ain't about a year. This is about a decade. Tell your neighbor, it's about a decade. It's about 10 years that the Lord has been good to me. And with this in mind, there's a perspective. And there's even a value that the years will teach you. What this decade has taught me more than anything else, Barbara, is the importance of contentment. Let the church say contentment. In life with peaks and valleys, highs and lows, joys and sorrows, births and deaths, victories and defeats, company and isolation, you better have something to manage the flux. Because if there's one thing that is for sure, it's change. Don't fool yourself. Change is what is constant. Flux is what is constant. And if you're going to be able to manage it and not lose your mind, you got to have some contentment. Contentment is the capacity to appreciate and enjoy each moment for what it is while you are living it. It's the ability to withstand going up and down when life goes up and down by realizing that you are neither your peaks nor your valleys. Can I let you in on a secret? If you are as up and down as your life is, you are an unstable person. If the ups and downs of life determine when you're up and down, you're a human pogo stick. Because the longer you live, the more you realize what Big Mama said was right. Sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes almost level to the ground. You better have something that can hold you and maintain you when life is up and when life is down. And that thing is called contentment. Contentment rests upon 2 pillars, humility and hope. Humility is required for the high days, and hope is required for the low days. Humility helps you avoid believing things are better than they really are, and hope helps you avoid believing that things are worse than they are. And as we approach this new 10-year season, my wish for everybody under the sound of my voice is that you grab you some contentment. The Apostle Paul helps us out with this when he says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I've learned in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. At the time of this writing, Paul is in solitary confinement with the certainty of execution looming over his head. With the possibility of death becoming more real with each passing day, Paul is not found languishing in a cell feeling sorry for himself or being embittered by the state of his life. He's found writing letters to churches and to 3 sons in ministry with the aim of instructing and encouraging them in their individual and collective walks with Jesus. And in this particular instance of this text, Paul is approaching the close of his letter to the church at Philippi, which was near and dear to his heart due to the tremendous support that they've been to him throughout his ministry. Throughout the letter, he has sought to impress upon them the matter of being joyful in the Lord. From chapter 1, verse 18, where he speaks about rejoicing that Christ is preached from both pure and impure motives, all the way to the last chapter where he tells the church, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. You are struck by the internal strength that defies where Paul is, that puts a thumb up against what he's facing. Paul seems to anticipate his readers reading the letter, and as they read it, it doesn't look like Paul is in what he's in. You see, there are some folk, they ain't got to tell you what they're in. They always look like what they're in. You can read them a mile away. Oh. But for Paul, if you read his letters, you wouldn't know he's in what he's in, because the content and the tone of what he's saying defies what he's in. I mean, he is awaiting execution by his head being cut off. You know, if that was some of us, our letters would be very, very short, and they'd be filled with a whole bunch of complaint. Child, they ain't letting me know when they gonna execute me. That ain't Paul. Paul's talking about rejoicing in the Lord, being careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will keep your heart and your mind. That's what he's talking about. And he realizes that folk are reading the letter, and they can't believe what they're reading because they know what he's facing. And so he seeks to clue them in on how he could be the way that he is with these words: I've learned in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. I know how to abound. I know how to be abased. Everywhere in all things I've learned both to be full and to be hungry, to abound and to suffer need. Why? Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There are a couple of things that Paul provides that have been lessons from this past decade, and I just want to drop them on you, and then we'll be out of here. The first thing is, how well you live is a product of how well you learn. How well you live is a product of how well you learn. The quality of life is impacted and influenced by the lessons that you and I learn. And learning is not just that which is taught in a classroom. It's that which is caught in our lives. Life is a process of learning if you let it. Life can teach you a whole lot if you pay attention. How well you live is dependent upon how well you learn. Here, Paul, I have learned. Content of this letter as well as the joyful tone of the letter. Paul says, I'm able to write what I write because I learned something. And what he's learned hadn't just come from life, it's come from his life with Jesus. You see, a life with Christ where you know his name is a life of learning. The call to be a disciple of Christ is the call to be a learner And that very word means one who learns. Jesus calls us to come to him, and it's a call to learn, and it's to find out that he is meek and lowly in heart, and that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Contentment comes through living a life characterized by learning. Ask your neighbor, how you been learning? And I'm not just talking about what you gathered in a book, what you listened to a podcast or lecture. I'm talking about what you've been able to comprehend through the living of your life. Because life should be this way, realizing every episode is a teaching moment. It's constantly asking the question, what did you learn from this? If it's true that God is in every moment and that God is doing something in every moment, then it is also true that there are no wasted or empty moments. That every moment, good or bad, high or low, in or out, has the potential to instruct, to reveal, to educate, to convict, to correct, to uplift, and to inspire. Have you been learning what God's been trying to teach? Can I let you in on a little note? What you fail to learn, God will put you back in remedial class. I just hit somebody with something because you've been wondering why I gotta face this again. Because you didn't learn what you were supposed to learn. Why I gotta deal with that again? Because you didn't learn what you needed to learn. Right? Right? If you want to know why stupid people just keep on coming around you, it's obviously you ain't learned that there's some stupid magnet that you need to detach yourself. How well you live is how well you learn. But there's something else. How well you live is not dependent upon how well life is, but on how well you look at life. How well you live is not dependent upon how well life is, but on how well you look at life. Paul writes, I've learned in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. He alerts them and us about a great learning of his life, contentment, a freedom from want, a satisfaction with who one is, where one is, and what one has. The story is told of a Puritan who sat down to his meal and found that he only had a little bread and some water, and his response was to exclaim this, "What? All this and Jesus too?" Now, you know, most of us would have looked at bread and water and just say, "What?" You can't be serious. But he learned contentment. All this and Jesus too. Contentment is found when we have a correct perspective on life. You see, Paul, having known the wealth and privileges of prominence in the Jewish community and Roman citizenship, he knew what it was to abound and to be full. Such was his life before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus and before he surrendered to the apostolic calling upon his life. But when he met Jesus, when he surrendered to Jesus' call to be an apostle to the Gentile, Paul also knew what it meant to be humbled and to hunger, having suffered extraordinary hardships in his work. He talks about jailings and beatings and stonings and forcible ejection from several towns and shipwreck, to say nothing of emotional and spiritual disappointments and setbacks, and having experienced both highs and lows. He discovered that the wellness of his life was not in how well his life was, but in how well he approached the life that it had. He says he's learned in whatever state to be content. The reason why he could write such words of encouragement, seasoned with rejoicing, is because he's learned to be content within the cell, chained to soldiers, awaiting a chopping block. The sense of contentment, of sufficiency, of having enough, of being enough, was not dependent upon how well life was. It wasn't tied to how easy life was. It wasn't tied to how much he had at his disposal. It was tied to his attitude and to his outlook. It's how grateful, how thankful, how faithful, how hopeful he was with whatever he had, wherever he was. That's why he said, whatever things are lovely, pure, honest, of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things, regardless of how well life is or how well life is not. Fanny Crosby, the great writer of gospel songs like Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior, and Blessed Assurance, and I Am Thine, O Lord, was blinded when she was only 6 weeks old. Blinded by a country doctor who thought he was treating her with eye drops. Yet, she had an indomitable spirit that at the age of 8, she wrote this poem. Oh, what a happy child I am. Although I cannot see, I am resolved that in this world, contented I will be. That's an 8-year-old made blind because a doctor made a mistake. But she made up in her mind, I got to change how I feel about what I'm dealing with. Friends, how well you live is not dependent upon how well life is. It's on how well you approach life as life comes your way. And when you're dealing with the highs and lows, the peaks and the valleys, the triumphs and the traumas, it's not simply what has happened to you. It's about how you feel about what has happened to you. What you say about what has happened to you. How you respond to what is happening to you. Because while you cannot control external forces and circumstances, you can control how you respond to them in terms of what you believe and in terms of what you do. I want to help somebody quit trying to change folk who ain't going to change. Change how you feel about them. Change what you expect about them. Change the appointment that you make about them. The key, my friends, is you got to believe a better belief. And that is a matter of choice. Because in every event of our lives, we have the power to choose what we believe. And when something comes your way that is not something that you would have chosen, you got to choose a better belief in terms of what you're facing. In other words, I guess what I'm telling you is you got to have some faith. Got to have some trust. One example of better belief is choosing to believe that you are not what has happened to you. That is to say, if you experience loss, you got to be able to say, I am not the loss. I am not the defeat. I am not the setback. Because what happens is depression comes when you start equating who you are with what you're facing. But when you understand that there's a difference between what I'm facing and who I am, I'm a child of God. I can be in fire, but I'm a child of God. I can be laid off my job, but I'm a child of God. I can be left by myself, but I'm a child of God. I can be between paychecks or month to month, but I'm a child of God. And because I understand who I am, what I I face does not define me, and it does not determine how up or how down I am. That's why I can come into church and nobody knows what I'm facing, because when I come as a child of God. I come as an heir of God. I come as a joint heir with Jesus. When I come in, I'm not coming in based upon what I face, but I'm coming in based on what I believe. I believe that God is God. I believe that God cares for me. I believe that God has a plan for my life. I believe that God has a word over me. I believe that God is working all things together for the good of them that love him and are the called according to his purpose. Who am I talking to right now who is saying I'm defying what I'm facing because I'm choosing to believe something better than what I'm facing right now? Contentment is not about how well life is. It's about how well you live the life that you're facing. It's about how you feel in the midst of what you're facing, what you choose to believe. But then there's one more thing. How well you live independently of how well life is related to the source of your life. Paul concludes his statement with these words: I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Do you hear Paul? Do you hear how clear he is in terms of the tone and tenor and texture of his life, which gives him contentment? He's saying, what puts me at ease in the midst of being chained to soldiers, chained to a wall, awaiting my beheading, is because I've got a relationship with Jesus. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. I can call his name. Jesus. The sufficient life, the content life, the joy-filled life is a life in one place. Jesus. It's all throughout Paul's writing. Do you hear Paul? For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Do you hear him saying, I'm crucified with Christ? Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and who died for me. In Christ I live, move, and have my being. Because of Christ, Paul writes, I've learned whatever the circumstances, I can be content. In need, Christ is sufficient. In plenty, Christ is sufficient. In every situation, Christ is sufficient. With a thorn in my flesh that I prayed would be taken away 3 times, he spoke to me and said, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. In storms, Christ was sufficient. In shipwreck, Christ was sufficient. When snake bitten, Christ was sufficient. Paul could write, rejoice in the Lord always, because he knew he could do all things through Christ. When he says, I can do all things through Christ, that word literally means I can face all things through Christ. I can endure all things through Christ. I can carry all things through Christ. I don't have to run away. I don't have to give up. I don't have to waste away. I can face it. I can carry it. I can endure it. I can go through it because Christ is strengthening me. And he says, you know what? I'm facing death. They won't tell me when I'm going to die. I can die tomorrow. But he's saying I'm facing it with joy and triumph. Do you hear him writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4? He says, I'm now ready to be offered up, and the time of my departure is at hand. I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. I've finished my course. And now there is a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give unto me. And not just to me, but he'll give it to everybody who loves his appearing. Paul is saying, hey, y'all, I know that you're reading my letter, and I know that you're fretful for me, but can I tell you, chill out, because I am content with where I am. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And Paul says the strength that I have is the strength that Jesus received himself. It was the strength that Jesus had when he went into the Garden of Gethsemane, my God, and prayed so hard till sweat poured like drops of blood. And by the time that he finished praying, when he prayed the third time and the Father gave him the same answer, he got up. And when he got up with renewed strength. He could tell his disciples, wake up because the betrayer is coming. Why? Because I can face what's coming my way, because I've got the joy of the Lord. The joy of the Lord was set before him at Calvary, enabling him to endure the cross and despise the shame. When they said, if you be the Son of God, come down and save yourself, don't you fool yourself and not believe that in his humanity he would have come down, but there was something that held him together that said, I ain't got to call angels. I don't have to come down. I can hang here and die for the sins of the world. I can face the wrath of God. I can take the weight of death, hell, and the grave, because I've got the power of God that's giving me power to endure and to despise. I am content even on the cross so that I can say, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. I can go down in the grave. I can go down into hell because I'm so confident about who the Father is. As a matter of fact, I spoke about it before I died. I said, tear this body down. In 3 days, I'll raise it up again. I'm content in death, and I'll be content in resurrection. And so early Sunday morning, God raised Jesus from the dead, and he's alive forevermore because he had the power of God upon his life. I wonder, is there anybody here who can say that when I look back at the 10 years of my life, I can testify that Christ has given me strength? Is there anybody who can testify that Christ has been your strength? You found Christ to give you the power to live well. You found Christ to give you enough to face what you've had to face, carry what you've had to carry, fight what you've had to fight, endure what you've had to endure, overcome what you've had to overcome. Is there anybody in the building who can say, if I did not have Jesus, the miscarriage would have taken me away, the stillbirth would have taken me out, the divorce would have laid me low, but because I knew his name, I knew Jesus, and I could call on his name, and he answered. My God, friend, I know if you didn't know Jesus when Sean died, you would have been gone, but Jesus held you together. I wonder, am I talking to somebody now? Is there anybody who can say, I thank God that I knew Jesus. I thank God that Jesus has known me. I thank God that Jesus has held me together. I thank God that I've been able to face it with the power of Jesus. So snap five with your neighbor and say, neighbor, it's been 10 years, and I just want to thank God for being faithful and kind. It's been 10 years, and I want to thank God for supplying my every need according to his riches and glory. It's been 10 years, and I said goodbye to mama, but I want to thank God for drying my tears, hearing my cries, and giving me joy that comes in the morning. It's been 10 years. I don't have the income that I used to have, but I can testify he'll supply your need according to his riches in glory. I don't have all the friends I used to have, but I can testify he'll be a friend that sticks closer than a brother. I've had pain in my body, and pills haven't done me any good, but I can testify he's Jehovah Rapha, the God that healed me. Yeah, I've been knocked down several times, but I can testify that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll mount up on wings like an eagle. They'll run and not get weary. They'll walk and not faint. Yeah. Slap fire with your neighbor and say, neighbor, I feel like giving God a praise. 2010, he was good. 2011, he was kind. 2012, he was merciful. 2013, he was abundant. 2014, he was gracious. 2015, he was healer. 2016, he was deliverer. 2017, he was way maker. 2018, he was door opener. 2019, yeah. And here I am in 2020.